You probably recognize yourselves. Of course, we're much, much smaller than most everybody else. The important thing for me when I designed this distillery was that I wanted traceability from A to Z. So it's actually balanced that one mashing is one fermenter, is one wash distillation, one spirit distillation put to one cask. So we always have traceability from field with the barley to mashing to distillation to the actual cask. And we'll go through the cask when I come over there. So more or less we get, depending on what kind of cask we put it in, generally about 110 up to 150 LPAs into a cask. Generally we put it into cask at from 62 up to about 68% alcohol. Mashing, more or less standard. We use 3 waters as most distillers. We do work with a bit of a different temperature schedule to get more of the volatile congeners out. And that's also why we don't want to have a too thick bed, because we need to aerate it to get those aldehydes out. Of course, after mashing, we get the sugar solution over to fermentation. And of course, the fermentation is dependent on 3 factors, more or less. It's what temperature you ferment at, of course what kind of yeast you use, and for how long you ferment. And generally, most distillers ferment for somewhere in between 40 to 60 hours, because then you get most of the alcohol out. Of course, we don't just want to create alcohol, we want to create something that tastes and smells. And this is Chemistry 101. Of course, we create acids, carbon dioxide, which is a very weak acid, lactic acid, vinegar, whatever, and we create alcohols. We want to create different alcohols because when we mix acids and alcohol together, we create aldehydes, ketone, all that taste the same. So that's why we work with very long fermentations. Generally, we go up to about 120, 140 hours, depending on recipe. So long fermentation, controlled temperature. So we have different temperature controls for different stages of the fermentation. And of course, we work with different yeasts, because again, yeast, looking into beers, and a bit Ralliant, of course, but whiskey is nothing short of distilled beer. And in beer, we tend to say that the yeast is about 1/3 of the character. Looking into wines, it's about 10 to 15%. Looking into whiskey, it's somewhere between 5 to 10% of the character actually comes from the yeast. So if you just do a standard fermentation, you won't get any flavor. But that's why we have our own strain of wine yeast, we have our own strain of beer yeast, and then the distiller's yeast to get the alcohol. See, this is fermenting quite well. Generally, depending on recipe again, just started out, quite a good foam, and we don't want to hustle a lot with the actual fermentation of the liquid, more than controlling the temperature and the yeast. So we don't have agitators, and we don't mess with the fluid, because that generally upsets the chemical reactions and the biological reactions. So we create all those flavor components, we create the alcohol, and we bring it up to, generally, depending on recipe again, but generally up to about 8.5% alcohol. Some recipes we don't ferment up to more than about 5.5, 6%. We do some of the fermentation with all grains in, for example. Then when we do the varieties where we're going to do vodka and gin out of the spirit, we actually ferment it up all the way to, not all the way, because some of our vodka friends actually ferment it up to 15 or 20%. But we bring it up to about 11.5%. So a bit stronger, but then it's more of getting the alcohol out, and we want some of the fruit to the beefy character, but not too much.
Okay.
So, of course, after the fermentation, we're bringing it over to distillation. And generally when we do the whiskies, we distill it twice. First distillation, of course, is mainly taking away the harmful components like the ethyl carbamate, the sulfur component that we could create over fermentation. Of course, water and solids, yeast components, flour, whatever. We bring it up from about 8.5% alcohol up to about 25% alcohol.
Okay.
And of course, what we get out, we tend to call low wines, and the low wine is brought over to second distillation. And of course, second distillation is where we actually decide what flavor we want out, and sorting out the different congeners, the flavor and scent components by boiling point. And what's quite unique here is that we actually generally not just take it on into foreshots or heads, middle cut and tails. We could actually divide the middle cut as well to get the flavor profile where we want. So we actually divide that portion as well, and then we bring it over to maturation. So that's more or less how we do the raw spirit for the whiskey. Going over to when we actually do the likes of vodka, gins, and aquavit. Of course, when we do vodka, gins, and aquavit, we need to distill the spirit above, in European legislation, above 96% alcohol. American legislation is 95. But still, in a pot still, you can't distill anything over theoretically 88% alcohol. So we need to column distill. So we column distill that spirit. Actually, we pot still distill it first. So what we get over from fermentation, we pot still up to about 28% alcohol, and we column distill it up to 96.2, 96.3. Then we cut it back to about 55% alcohol, and we bring it into wood, to oak maturation. So this is an organic vodka that we put into American oak, brand new virgin organic oak, and feel free to taste it. And we mature it, depending on what kind of recipe we do, between 1 up to 5 years on oak. So gets a lot of character out from the wood. Some of the acidic characters as well, so it's a bit over oaked, but have some nice characters to it. So to make this into a vodka, a gin, or an aquavit, we actually take it out from the oak, we cut it back to about 40% alcohol, and then we infuse it with herbs, botanicals, we macerate it, sometimes we boil it out a bit, let it rest, and then we distill it, and we do that in the spirit still. So if we're going to do an aquavit, for example, we infuse it with caraway and some other herbs and citric fruits. If we're going to do gin, we obviously add on junipers, coriander, and so forth. And then we get a clear liquid, because obviously all the color is lost in distillation. So that's how we create a clear vodka or a gin. The benefit here, of course, is that we have some of the extract from the wood. We obviously take away the harsh notes that we feel here, but we get the vanilla character out, we get some of the other woody notes out that actually complements and gives us a very, very smooth and gentle gin and vodka. That way we get a vodka that we don't need to excessively filter or chill filter or carbon filter or anything. What we get out, we just cut it back to what percentage we're going to bottle it at. We'll let it rest for about 3 months before we actually bottle it. So no other additives, no sugars, no nothing. Plain, gentle product. Most other vodkas and gins in the world, of course, they just do a neutral spirit and they add a flavor component. So we don't need to do that. The other benefit of this, of course, is that we actually get ex-vodka barrels. Those barrels that actually, the new barrels that previously contained this spirit that we're going to make vodka out of. When they're empty, we fill them with the whiskey to be. That way, we more or less get like a bourbon cask light, because obviously the reason for wanting to use ex-bourbon barrels, whatever, is that you don't want the excessive woody notes. But the downside on bourbon is that most bourbon in the world, of course, is GMO, or it contains genetically modified organisms, because all corn is, and of course it's not organic. And if we're going to put an organic whiskey into a cask, we need to ensure that the cask also is organic. So this way we could ensure that cask, we know what's happened all the way through, it's organic, and we actually get a whiskey that doesn't get that rough character that we get from other notes, but we don't get the perfumey notes from a bourbon. So that's how we do the other ones. Looking into the aquavit and the flavored vodkas or oak matured vodkas, we have like the summer spirit, the winter spirit, and the aquavit. When we've done the clear spirit in the distillation here, we put it back into wood, to American virgin oak, and with the summer spirit we keep it 3 years in wood, with the aquavit 4.5 years, and with the winter spirit we keep it up to 6 years in wood. So that gives a very, very mature character to it. So that's more or less what we do here. The small still, the essence still here is where we actually do essences for other products we use, but also for other producers. And some of the characters we take out from the heart here or from other cuts, we actually distill into other products or essences or flavor taste enhancers that we sell to others. So that's another point.